Welcome to Talent Matters, the podcast where talent, skills, and grit take centre stage. I'm your host, Donal O'Donoghue, and this is episode 13. The podcast is sponsored by Sanderson, talent solutions that transform businesses globally, and Finero, the multi-award winning tax experts who support financial success for contractors, freelancers, and solopreneurs. In this episode, I'm very pleased to be joined by adventurer, campaigner, and keynote speaker, Nikki Bradley. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me.
You're
Delighted to
really,
be
really
here.
welcome, and thank you for coming all the way down from
No
Donegal,
worries.
bringing the sunshine with
Any
you.
excuse to be down in Dublin with the sunshine. I don't always bring it with me, but I did today, so it's great.
It's all good. It's great to see you. As you know, we always like to kick off because this podcast is all about talent and skills and grit, and we like to understand where you came from. So tell us a little bit about life growing up.
I love that you asked this question because I was saying this to you before. I quite often, because of my story, I quite often get asked, what happened from the age of 16, but nobody ever asks about life before. And obviously I had a full life before I was diagnosed, which obviously we'll talk about later. As a child, I was always upside down. I absolutely loved gymnastics. I spent half my life cartwheeling everywhere I went, to the point where I actually had damaged cartilages in both knees as a result. But it was totally worth it. I was bubbly, fun. I loved being around people. I loved being outside, playing games. Back in the days, like when we lived in Lucan in Dublin, we would make grass houses. I don't know, does anybody remember them? It was such innocent fun. When the grass was just mowed, we would collect it all and make little houses, and just little things like that. The most simple activities brought me joy. And yeah, that was kind of it. I was curious, eager, and always up for a bit of fun wherever I could find it.
And so you're originally from Dublin
Yeah.
and spent time in Lucan.
Yeah, so I was born in Lucan, lived there till I was 8, and then we moved to a little town called Rathdrum. Its biggest in Wicklow. Its biggest claim to fame was, the film Michael Collins.
Yes,
Part of it was filmed in Rathdrum. When we lived there, it was just so cool to be there, to see the main characters coming down the street in Rathdrum. It was so surreal. And then after that, I moved to Donegal, and I've been travelling around since with work, but home is in Donegal now.
Yeah, and you got the Donegal accent, and you consider yourself a Donegal woman.
It depends.
Through and through.
Depends who I'm speaking to. Depends what the weather's doing in Donegal.
Very good. And what did you gravitate towards when you were studying, when you were in school? So like when you're in, I suppose, when you started secondary school, what were the subjects and your kind of interests when it came to?
I kind of had a few different interests. I loved art. I loved the creativity. The fact that you were given an hour or 40 minutes to just be creative. I absolutely loved that. I really enjoyed English as well. Most of it. There was some parts of it now I wasn't as good at, but I really enjoyed, again, just being creative. Geography, which I have forgotten most of, but at the time I enjoyed it. And history, I actually ended up studying at 3rd level. Now, it's a subject that I chose because I wanted to be better at it, but I wasn't naturally good at it. So that was, every time I was anywhere near a history class, it was a struggle, but I felt it was a worthwhile subject to pursue because obviously, it's important to have that knowledge. So a nice little mix.
Very good. And then, as you touched on earlier on, life changed for you when you were in secondary school.
Yeah, so I was in 5th year, and just to kind of briefly give the background before the main day that I was given my diagnosis, I had a lump on my pelvis for most of the summer of 2002, I think it was. So on the right-hand side, and eventually I couldn't ignore it any longer. I showed my mum, and, she panicked, obviously, brought me to the doctor, x-rays, fast forward then a few weeks, and I found myself sitting in front of my consultant being told I had Ewing sarcoma. So not only did I not know what Ewing's was, the doctor actually wasn't familiar with it either. That's how rare it was. So that was just literally life-changing. But it was also completely terrifying. It was a couple of weeks before Christmas. They couldn't do anything. They couldn't start any treatment because it was that close to the holidays. So you're given that news and then you're just kind of sent home for a few weeks. And what I always say to people is, and most people, unfortunately, in this day and age, have either indirectly or directly come in contact with the cancer diagnosis. And that period between diagnosis and treatment, even if it's only a few days, for the person that's being diagnosed will feel like weeks, because in those days, all you have are your own thoughts and the fear of the unknown. I had about 5 weeks of that because of the Christmas break. So It was probably the beginning of the change of my mindset, even from that early age, because I had to find a way to cope with what was coming because I had no choice. I was
And
either,
it's that word that nobody ever wants to hear, isn't it?
it is, yeah. And I'm very to the point. You know, when it comes to certain information, I want to be given it direct. So I remember asking my consultant, you know, what will happen if I don't have treatment? And he literally said, you'll die. Now, my parents were raging with him for being so honest, but to this day, I'm still friendly with the consultant, and I will never forget his honesty, because that's sometimes what you need. Whether what he's saying is what you want to hear is almost irrelevant. Sometimes you just need to be told the truth, because from there you can then make a plan. Sometimes, you know, we can sugarcoat things to a point where false hope can creep in, and then I find that a dangerous space, especially when dealing with something like this. So yeah, that 5 or 6 week
That
period.
5 week period sounds horrendous though, because that's when you can't make a plan when you're just
Yeah, when we
in
just
no
don't
man's
know.
land.
Like now, if it happened, I would know exactly what's coming down the line. So I probably wouldn't be that scared at all. But back then, and like I was the first person in my entire community, as well as my family, to be given a cancer diagnosis. So it was huge for everyone. But there was nobody I could turn to
So
because
there
of
was
that.
no family hereditary anything
No.
that points to it. It's
It
and
was
it's
yeah, it
so
was
rare.
just I could have been born with it for all I know. It's, you know, it's centered around the bone, and the year I was diagnosed, I was told there was 16 others in Ireland, like 16, 17 including me. Like that's a very small number for the size of Ireland. So yeah, there was, you know, there's nobody to turn to ask, well, what'll happen here, or, you know, what should I do there. So actually, that 5 week period, even though it was scary, it kind of gave us enough time to say, right, we don't know exactly what's coming, but let's, as a family, deal with it. Let's just take one thing at a time. Instead of thinking you have to have 12 cycles of chemotherapy, you have to have 6 weeks of radiotherapy, over to England for surgery because surgeons in Ireland don't want to touch the tumour. If you think about it like that, it's huge and it's terrifying. But if you just say, right, on Monday, I'm going down to St. Vincent's for my first cycle of chemotherapy, and then we just plan within that week, suddenly it's, you know, it's a little bit more manageable, and you start focusing around the routine of, right, the next cycle will be next month, and, you know, you're fitting your life then around these cycles, and not just me, my family as well, obviously.
So
My
who
mum and
helped
dad,
you? Like who? Because at you were what 16,
16,
17?
17 when I
Yeah.
started, yeah, when I started treatment.
So that ability to look at things and actually think, okay, the best thing we can do is just focus on the next step that's right in front of us and do this as well as we can do it. Who did you get that from, or who helped you
Most likely my parents. I can't remember exactly, but I know just with the type of people they are, that they would have said that, you know, like, let's not look at everything, let's not panic, let's just deal with one thing at a time. And that really helped. It's so simple, and people say it all the time, but in this scenario, it makes a huge difference, because you can kind of block out what's coming down the line, and quite a lot of what's coming you actually still don't know, even though you know you've your appointments in at, you know, on these certain dates. A lot can happen in between that. With chemotherapy, you know, you're susceptible to infection. If that happens, that can delay the next cycle. So, you know, there was a lot of unknown throughout the journey. So just keeping it to 1 week periods helped. And yeah, it just made it a bit easier.
When you think about those teenage years when you're 16 or 17, it's all about getting through your exams, relationships, being accepted by the group. Your social life is everything. How did that manifest in terms of dealing with rounds of chemo and the treatment and trying to have normality?
Well, basically everything you've just said went straight out the window the day I was diagnosed. I was diagnosed in my school uniform, and I have never been back to that school since. That's how quickly I was plucked from the life that I knew. My friends rallied round, and again, because it was such an unusual thing to happen to someone my age, rumours were rife. From what I was being told, you know, I was in an all-girls school, but everyone in the boys' school knew, the people in the mixed school knew, like the whole town, it seemed, was talking about this. Now, bearing in mind, this is over 20 years ago, so, you know, it was more of a community back then. But my biggest worry was, I knew people were going to talk about me, but there was rumors starting to circulate that I had breast cancer, and I just thought, if people are going to talk about me anyway, they may as well know what I have. So why am I keeping it a secret? So I gave my friends permission to just share, like, you know, rather than say nothing. If people ask, just tell the truth. And then that very quickly just, you know, all the other rumors just went away. And again, there was a learning opportunity within that, you know, sometimes keeping things to yourself isn't actually the best thing to do. In the long run, you can make life easier for yourself by just sharing. by just getting it out there. And I didn't realize how much I would end up doing that now. Back then, like, I didn't realize that I would basically, my career would be based around sharing and being honest. But yeah,
And actually, it's interesting, isn't it? It's the chance to actually control the narrative yourself rather than have a rumor mill or have people in the absence of what's actually going on. There's a certain strength in actually controlling that yourself and using it for something positive, which is what you're all about. Because the one thing about you is you're probably the most positive mindset of anyone I've come across, certainly since we've been doing this. And when we talked about, you know, this conversation, it's like, well, actually what we want to talk about is mindset and resilience and actually the positivity that you've kind of put out there. So give us an overview just of the cycles of treatment that you went through from that kind of period, from when, say, from you were 17 over the next number of years.
So the treatment, as I mentioned, it was 12 cycles of chemotherapy, and each cycle would basically result in me being in hospital for a week. So like it was administered over the space of 6 or 7 days. So those 12 cycles were spread over the guts of a year. And in between that, at the halfway point, I went over to London to have my surgery. So once I healed, the chemotherapy started up again. And then I had 6 weeks of daily radiotherapy. So the radiotherapy I talk about quite a lot because at the time I was given no information about it. Chemotherapy, I was inundated with leaflets and whatever I needed about it. But radiotherapy, back then anyway, it was just like, this is what'll happen for 20 minutes a day. And it didn't hurt. It was grand. I actually moved down with my grandmother who lived in Kildare because, you know, that commute was going to be tough going if I was doing that every day the whole way from Donegal. And we had a great time. You know, I would go into St. Luke's Hospital for 20 minutes a day. We would then go off and go shopping or go grab a coffee or do all the things she liked to do, like go to the garden centre. And, you know, so there actually was, radiotherapy was quite enjoyable, which is a really weird sentence to say. But I was very lucky in that, like a lot of people, when they have, especially on the face, if they have radiotherapy, it's incredibly painful. I was so lucky that it didn't hurt. So I was able to, I suppose, look at the positives around that period of time. Thankfully, I came out the other side and I was given the all clear. And touch wood, I'm still cancer free to this day. But that radiotherapy destroyed the bone in the hip. They couldn't have predicted it was going to happen. But about 3 years after my last radiotherapy appointment, I started noticing pain in my hip quite quickly. And 2006 was a big year in terms of humongous setbacks. And that was all stemming from the damage caused by radiotherapy. And kind of from 2006 until now, I've been dealing with the same issue. So basically, the bone that's still left, there's a small bit of bone in my pelvis. It's completely dead. The blood supply doesn't go there anymore. It's just done and dusted. And that was caused by the radiotherapy. So anything they try to attach to it. So like if you hear of somebody having a hip replacement, the hip prosthesis is attached to natural bone and it's designed then to fuse with your own natural body and then become part of you and whatever. That was meant to happen for me, but it just didn't. Because of that bone. So that has been that tiny piece of bone has been the cause of so many setbacks over so many years. And we're at a point now where obviously I've had major surgery in the last couple of years and it's still all coming from nothing being able to work with this little piece of bone. So it's kind of like having a team member that won't play ball. They kind of infect everyone around them. That's that piece of bone for me, that it doesn't matter what kind of technology they were talking about a 3D printed hip at one time.
Wow.
You know, amazing stuff. And I thought it sounded amazing. So I was like, yes, let's do that. But then it was like, well, so I ended up getting an infection after I had my first hip replacement. And because I've had an infection in that site, you're much more susceptible to future infections. So it's actually 1 in 2, they say. So that then immediately was discarded as an idea because that's a big surgery to have for such high odds of it getting infected. So yeah, that one piece has caused major setbacks. But you know what?
But life went on. So you went and, as you said, you studied history at third level?
Yeah, so I went to Galway and that was a big thing. Like when I did leave school, I had no choice. It was just plucked out. I tried to go back to adult education twice and I got as far as I'd done exams and, multiple things because I was adamant I wanted to get to third level. I didn't want cancer to stop that side of my life progressing. So I worked probably much harder in about 3 years than I'd done in my entire school years before, because I had that sense of perspective, and I appreciated that I was given this second chance. And yeah, I eventually got to NUI in Galway, and I studied a couple of different subjects. I did arts, like a lot of people in Galway, but I kind of did that because, as I mentioned earlier, I had different interests. So psychology was a big one for me as well. I loved studying people and their behaviors. So I did psychology, history, Sock and Paul, and English. And for a full year, I was a normal student, and I couldn't have been happier. I just felt like everyone else. I drank during the day. I watched Family Guy. Even though I was older than the other students that I was living with, I didn't care. And they called me like mommy and stuff like that. I didn't mind, because I was craving that normal life experience. And I got 1 year of my 3 or 4 year degree, and my health stepped in again, and I had to pull out of college because of severe pain in my hip. And that actually resulted, long story short, that resulted in me having a second hip replacement. But I fought for months before I had to make the decision to leave. I fought the pain. I tried to ignore it. I did everything I could to push through. But obviously, as having to have the second hip replacement is, proof that there was something serious going on. So it was when I had my second hip replacement that I realized that, in terms of education, by this stage, I had tried every avenue to push forward, and my health kept stopping me. So I am a believer in things happening for a reason. So I thought, maybe I'm somebody that's, I'll find my path without the traditional educational route. And because I'd learned so much along the way in the different courses I'd done, I thought, I just had a very strong feeling that it would just slot into place. And sure enough, it eventually did. But it's scary having that kind of faith, that things will work out without a third level degree or whatever. But it did. So
good. Well, I'm glad you got to get that at least that year of,
yeah.
because when it comes to learning, and when it comes to degrees and masters, that, they're well and good, but actually the experience that you're getting from the work that you're doing now, through keynote speaking, through campaigning, through all the research you've had to do on, you say you're not a medical practitioner, but we've had some fairly detailed conversations about some pretty groundbreaking medical procedures. Let's go up to the big one that happened a couple of years ago.
Yeah, so I kind of going back to that bit of bone that was causing so many issues. I after the second hip replacement, even though it technically didn't work, I was able to control the pain through exercise. And when I set up my campaign, Fighting Fit for Ewings, in 2013, we actually centered it around physical challenges and exercise, and that was done very intentionally. First of all, I wanted to turn the word challenge on its head, because obviously a lot of people view that word as a negative word. And I had faced challenges, health challenges, physical challenges, because of my cancer diagnosis. But I wanted to look at that word and see, what you could do with the right mindset, how you could challenge yourself physically and mentally, what I could do with my newly adapted body, having had that second hip replacement, with the right mindset, how far can we push ourselves? So that's basically what we did. We trained in the gym a couple of times a week, took on some amazing challenges. And for a long time, thanks to all of that, I was able to control the nerve pain that I experienced daily, the muscle pain, the, general pain in the hip joint. But then COVID happened. 2020, that year that we all want to forget. I didn't realize how much I was relying and how heavily I was relying on services such as the gym and swimming pool, and even just walking outside of a 5K radius, until all of that was taken away. So it kind of, for me, it was almost like those feelings that everybody felt during COVID of, now we appreciate what we have. That's what I felt when I was given the all clear with my cancer diagnosis. And I remember looking at the general public, how we all, as a world, how we reacted to lockdown, and what a lot of people did afterwards. How some people changed their lives completely whenever places opened up again. But for me, when those services were taken away, my pain went through the roof. Within literally weeks, my neck and my back were in absolute agony. I was seeing specialists to have steroid injections in both the neck and the back.
And was this all stemming from that
Yeah.
that hip?
So basically, the hip and the back are very, if there's a problem with one, you're going to have a problem with the other. And especially if there's a problem with the hip, you will probably have a problem with your back because of how you walk. And I definitely, like, I'd walked a certain way for a long time because of a lot of surgery in the right hip. So it was the first surgery that I ever had any say in, for starters. Every other surgery I've had up to this point has been an emergency situation, and it was very much, this is what you need to have done, otherwise A or B is going to happen. Whereas, because the pain was mostly in my back, I was given a say in what way we moved forward. I remember thinking, I can put up with this pain in my back, but I'm now going to be dealing with back pain, neck pain, and everything that's happening in my hip. And at that stage, I was let's just say, in my 30s. I won't give you my exact age, but I started to think ahead. I was like, well, if this is what I'm like now, what am I going to be like in 10 years? Am I going to be able to do the things that I love doing now if I don't step in and take control right now when I have the opportunity to do it? So I went over to my I keep going to say my professor, my surgeon, who is a professor, Professor Jays. He's an incredible surgeon based in Birmingham. He loves, as I said to you earlier, and when we were talking, he loves weird and wonderful cases. He's a very creative man. And when people like me walk through his door, like I've often said, like, you can nearly see him rubbing his hands together because this is a challenge for him. And he's been amazing in terms of thinking of different options that I could explore. So it was me that made the appointment to see him. And I sat down and I said, look, this is the pain I'm now in. I had an 11 centimeter leg length discrepancy, meaning that on the left foot, when I walked, my foot was flat, but on the right, when I stood, my foot was up, literally up on its tippy toes all the time. So that's hard going. Standing when I was at events, when I was delivering talks, I was like a flamingo, basically. I was standing on one leg, and the pain in this hip would become unbearable because obviously it was taking my full weight. So you're thinking about that as well, like, what's going to happen with this side of things, or with this side of my body. So I went in to speak to Professor Jays, and I just said, like, look, what can we do? What are my options? I know amputation has been on the table, so if we are going to look at that, what types of amputations are available to me? So there was a couple, but he narrowed it down to 3. One was hind quarter amputations. That's when they take absolutely everything, the hip included. So I would never be able to avail of a prosthetic limb, which was a definite no. Now, maybe down the line, I might face that depending on what happens with that dreaded piece of bone. But I didn't want to jump straight to that if I had an option. The second was 3D printed hip, which, as I said earlier,
sounds so cool, doesn't
that's
it?
what I thought. I was like, oh, as soon as I heard that, I was like, imagine that story, being able to tell that story in the pub. Yeah, I have a 3D printed hip. But unfortunately, because of everything I'd said earlier, it became very apparent that would be too much of a risk for me to take. And then the third was a rotation plasty. And when I Googled it for the first time, and your listeners now will probably Google it while they're listening, I was terrified. My first thought was, this is some sort of Frankenstein operation. Like, why would he even suggest this? And I was almost angry that he would dare suggest such a horrendous, like, obviously this was my thinking back then, or such a horrendous surgery.
So just explain what a rotation
plasty is. It's really hard to explain, but it's essentially when they amputate the lower half of your leg, rotate it 180 degrees and reattach it. So it means the whole reason that they do it is that you can repurpose joints and parts of your body that otherwise would be, in a normal amputation, would be discarded. So it's basically like the best form of recycling ever. So in my case, obviously, my hip was the problem, but the rest of my leg was perfectly fine. So it seemed very wasteful to get rid of it all. So once I got past the shock of what a rotation plasty looked like, and the main reason I felt that way was because of the images that I found when I searched online. And I knew that if I was going to opt for this surgery, that I was going to make sure that the next person that looked at images of rotation plasty after me would not see what I saw, because it put me off for the very first time rotation plasty was mentioned, just in passing. It put me off for years. I was horrified. So it took a lot for me to accept that this is the way I would look, until I found a girl. She's either Australian or New Zealand. I think she might be New Zealand. Her name is Jessica Quinn. She's a content creator from that side of the world, and she's had a rotation plasty. And now I did have to do a lot of digging to find her. And when I did, she changed my opinion of how I could be as a rotation plasty person. patient, whatever, because of how she behaved, because of how she lived her life. And, you know, she really motivated me to look past the physical side of things and think about, from a medical point of view, the fact that we're in a world that a rotationplasty is even an option.
It's incredible.
It's unbelievable.
So just for people that are watching or listening, so effectively what was your knee became your hip, and what was your ankle became your knee.
Yeah. So obviously that's so straightforward. Um, yeah, it is weird. Like, let's call a spade here. It's a weird way to.
It's unbelievable,
But
that,
it is.
that we can do that.
It's
isn't it?
amazing, and I've had a really positive experience. My prosthetic that I have at the moment isn't perfect. It's not ideal for what I want to do with it, and I'm probably going to end up, I'd imagine, going over specialists in Holland. And the main reason for that is because Holland, India, and America are the three areas that rotationplasty is most common for. I'm not really sure for what reason, but they're the main areas that most young people have rotationplasty. So if I go to Holland and go to a prosthetic specialist, obviously they're going to have seen more patients, therefore they'll have more experience. Whereas in Ireland, you know, I kind of worked with the prosthetic specialists to tell them, you know, what part hurt more and what way I would need to move. But to be perfectly honest, this one, you saw me walking up the stairs. I have to take it one at a time. And, you know, when you have a fast mind and a slower body, that's not a good combination. So in my head, I'm still who I was before I was, you know, diagnosed. I'm still wanting to cartwheel. I'm still wanting to race around the place and get things done a mile a minute. But when your body slows you down, it's, you know, especially, you know, sometimes you've no choice. But if it's just the case of a different prosthetic could bring me back to the speed somewhat that I had before, I'd be delighted. And it's worth a trip to Holland. So
Definitely. I'd love to go back to mindset for a minute, because you're known as an adventurer. You've done some pretty challenging stuff. Talk to us about some of the things that you've taken on.
So there's been really normal adventures that you'd expect from, like, I use the term adventurer loosely because there's people out there that have earned that title more than me. But yes, some of the things that we've done through the campaign, one of the first was abseiling off Fanad Lighthouse. It was the most random thing. I used to write for the paper up in Donegal, and I would have my readers challenge me, and that was one that came in. So we thought it would be easy. We thought we'd just go up to Fanad and do it, and it would be fine. I obviously had professionals with me. But oh my God, the red tape with Irish Lights. And when they finally gave us that go ahead, it actually made it a much more enjoyable and much more exciting challenge because it was so difficult to get the green light. But I've also done like bigger things, like I've done some big sea stacks. The Stirl, I mentioned to you earlier on, the Stirl in Donegal. Again, I would encourage your listeners to just look it up online. It's one of Europe's largest headlands. That's one of my favourite things I've done, especially locally, because it's really challenging for me with my crutches to get to the top and then to walk across. Again, with a podcast, it's hard to explain it, but it's just the view from the top and that sense of accomplishment when you get to the top is unbelievable.
We were talking as well about, you know, when you're in school and somebody, you know, hurts their ankle or something like that, and somebody comes into school on crutches and everybody wants to go with the crutches. And you realize after a couple of seconds that it's hard on the wrists, it's hard on the shoulders.
Yeah.
So like the thought of actually taking on those challenges and doing, like you did the 4 peaks.
Yeah,
as well.
so the 4 peaks, I was the first crutch user in Ireland, I believe, to do 4 peaks in 32 hours. So we started with Carrauntoohil, which obviously is the biggest, over then to Croagh-Patrick, which actually was the toughest. Because of all the scree. I know they've put in some steps now since I did it, but that was a tough challenge. Then we went over to Sleep Donard, which is in County Down, and oh my God, that is one beautiful mountain. You walk through the forest before you even get to the base of the mountain, and we got to the summit just as the sun was rising. We couldn't have timed it better. And then we finished with Mount Errigal in Donegal, and the things I learned on that, you know, I was saying to you again earlier that if you're going to plan a challenge that big, don't organise it and participate in it. That would be my one piece of advice, because I was exhausted before we got to Kerry because of all the planning beforehand. But at the same time, what I learned through that process will stay with me forever. It was unbelievable. And I also met my first Ewing's survivor in County Mayo. They'd heard that the story had gone on to the news that we were doing this challenge. And a man called Paddy and his wife had heard about it. And Paddy was a Ewing's survivor. And he was an amputee. He'd lost his leg because of the cancer. But he'd heard that we were going to be at some point during the day attempting Patrick, and he waited in the car park. We actually don't know how long he waited for to meet us. And I remember when I was getting out of the car being absolutely exhausted from Carntoohil. The climb itself was tough, but that drive then from Kerry to Mayo, that's when the body stiffens up. And I just remember getting out of the car, just saying to myself, I don't want to do this. Patrick is a really tough climb. I just really don't want to do this. And then I met Paddy, and I practically skipped up the mountain after I met him. And this is what I mean about things happening for a reason, and why I'm such a big believer in that, because that, like, in all the years since I've had Ewings, to only meet my first survivor at that age, it just goes to show as well, how rare it is and how few people actually survive. But it gave me the kick up the ass that I needed, and it was brilliant. Probably my favorite challenge that I've ever done was the fan dance. Fan dance is a 24-kilometer trek through the Brecon Beacons in Wales, and it involves climbing the Penny Fan Mountain twice in the one challenge. And you can do the winter edition or the summer edition. And back when I was organising challenges, we always said, like, if they're big ones, we'll do them once and we'll move on to the next one. So we knew realistically we probably wouldn't do the fan dance again. So we chose to do the harder version, which is the winter edition. Because why not? But I also love winter conditions. I love the snow. I much prefer that to the heat, because with the crutches you build up serious heat just within the first 5 minutes of moving anyway. So to do it in the summer, actually for me, probably would have been harder than the winter. But this event is organised by ex-SAS military personnel, and their mindset I find incredibly interesting. The way they approach everything it's so structured. It's so, there's no BS. It's just, let's just get this done. And the way they organize that event, just everything around it was based around respect for your human, your fellow humans that you're walking this trek with. And yeah, it's
And did you do it with the military pack on your back?
Yeah,
or?
so that's one of the rules. So there's a million rules with this as well. And if you fail any one of them, if you turn up in the wrong gear, and they check out what you're wearing, and they say it's not suitable, they will turn you away on the day. And it's the same with the backpack. You can't just fill your backpack with sand to whatever weight that they've asked for. It has to be items that will help you if you're stuck up the mountain. Basically what army personnel would have to use. And even that idea I loved, and it was also practical. We had our water, we had our food. It was very practical. But just the whole thing, it's one of those, if you're into your endurance events especially, I would look it up, because they actually do the Trident fan dance, which is 3 fan dance back to back without a break.
Wow.
So you're just moving for probably a day and a half or whatever, depending on how fast you can get it done. But you're moving through the night as well, and you have to camp, and it's a whole, well, I think you do anyway, but it's another level of adventure. I've scaled the Solheimjökull Glacier in Iceland. That was quite a long time ago now. I think that was 2016. And that was probably the first challenge that I said no to initially. It was a photographer friend of mine suggested it, because he was going to come with us and get some brilliant shots while we were there. And I remember thinking, how ridiculous is it for a crutch user to attempt to walk on ice? Why would I even attempt this? Like, I'm setting myself up for failure. And those negative thoughts just bombarded my mind. And then I looked at the crutches that I used, the ones I have today. They're called side sticks. They're made out of carbon fiber. They're the toughest things I've ever been able to use. Before I found that company, I would go through crutches every other month. I remember taking a picture of, I think I had 11 pairs of crutches lined up proudly against the wall, every one of them bent, because of what I like to do with them. So when I found carbon fiber, I was like, yeah, you don't go back after that. These are unbelievable. And then I looked at the other accessories that this company do, and what they offer. They're kind of like little cleats that you put. They're like little crampons for you. So to walk on ice with my feet, I would have needed crampons, and all you need to do the same with your crutches is mini crampons. It's as simple as that. So I ordered them, and they sent over some wider, like, cleat type things that would allow you to actually walk up ice. And that was literally the solution. It couldn't have been simpler. The actual trek itself wasn't that difficult, because we only did a route of it. We didn't do the full thing. It was just essentially walking on snow and ice, but without the equipment, it would have been completely impossible. Like, to the point where even when we walked out of the airport, just walking from the airport to the car, because I didn't have the equipment on my crutches, it was like an ice rink. That was nearly harder than the trek itself. And it really made me think how easily we can say no because we don't have the right equipment, or because, because we just haven't done enough research to actually figure out, can we do this or not? And like, as soon as I realized that they sold all those kind of products, it was an immediate yes. And then a few months later, we were there and got it done. And it really opened my eyes to, with the right people around you and the right mindset, you literally can walk on ice with crutches if you have the right bits with you.
Tell me something. One of the themes that keeps coming through seems to be how you connect physical endeavor with your mental resilience. Talk to me a little bit about that.
So they're completely connected. Again, going back to the word challenge, I actually approach everything in life as a mini challenge. So I haven't told many people this, but I had a cancer scare last year, towards the end of last year, and it was very likely that it was going to be cancer. It's the closest cancer scare I've had since actually being diagnosed, and it was a terrifying time. I was immediately drawn back to that time in my life. But because of how I now view things, I was able to, I spent a couple of weeks in hospital. I was then quite sick at home, and I was able to break it down into manageable little challenges that I just had to get through. And that was 100% down to the way my mind now works. So going back to what I said at the very beginning about, breaking it down when I was having my chemotherapy, let's just do it 1 week at a time. That's what I did when I was going through that cancer scare, because my mind was absolutely dying to go over here and panic and go into full blown, like, let's have a meltdown. But I couldn't let that happen, because once you open that door, it's hard to close it again. So when it comes to any type of challenges, when it comes to, setting physical challenges, testing myself in, testing my body, I will look at it through right, what can I learn by doing this? Like, in the earlier days, I would have just, if somebody suggested a challenge, challenge, I would have just said, yeah, like, fine, we'll figure it out. But now I think much more about, what can I learn by doing this? And that's kind of how I think about, as I said, about everything. And it makes it so much easier when things go wrong. When just normal life things go wrong, it makes those moments much easier to deal with, because I have this part of my mind now that is never going to change. I know that now from how long it's been there.
It is. It's the
there.
iron mindset, isn't it?
It's my version of it. Like, I listen to loads of other people that have done far more exciting and dangerous things than I have, and they have a much more, probably day to day, they have a much more of an iron mindset. I just have it there when I need it. So like, I love a good moan. Like, I literally will spend a good bit of my day moaning about absolutely nothing, because I'm Irish mainly. So that's where most of my mind is. But when I need it, it's there. And that's,
but even
what's
the little
important.
things, like I was looking on your social media, and it was like, in the gym, doing the rowing machine, doing the battle ropes, like that's tough stuff. And the rowing machine with using one leg, like that's.
Yeah. Well, do you know what? The rowing machine was funny, because in the early days when when I started up the campaign and we were hitting the gym 3 times a week, we were using traditional machines. So it was just when CrossFit was starting to become popular in Ireland, but not quite that you had the decent machines. You certainly didn't have battle ropes, I don't think. So you had the likes of a rowing machine, treadmills, the normal things that you'd see in kind of a hotel gym. And I liked the rowing machine because it worked pretty much, depending on how you did it, it worked your whole body. But I couldn't do it because of my right leg. And for a good maybe month and a half into the 3-month initial training period when I set up the campaign, we didn't use it. And it was actually my trainer just said, couldn't have been more simple. He just said one day, why don't you just not put both feet into the stirrup things? Why don't you just put your right foot, just rest it on the ground, and only strap your left foot in and see what happens? And I mean, literally, that was the solution. I had been avoiding it or trying to do it as best as I could with both feet in, and the solution couldn't have been more simple, in that it was just take that foot out and go. And I was able to get the same amount of movement than, as everybody else. And the battle ropes, I actually just love the battle ropes. You can feel the burn immediately, and from a vanity point of view, you can notice the definition in your arms quite quickly if you're a regular battle rope user. But yeah, everything else, everything can be adapted. Absolutely everything can be adapted. And with the rowing machine now, since I've had my surgery, it's not as easy to just put my foot on the ground, because it'll drag back and forth, because obviously I can't control that part of my foot. but one of the, the foam rollers that you'd kind of use during your cool down. In my gym, they have one on wheels, and we flipped it the other way. It was actually my partner that came up with this weird and wonderful solution. Flipped it the other way, and I was able to slot my foot into it. So it was like a little Flintstones car. It just rolled back and forward. It gave me that ease to be able to use the rowing machine perfectly. And like sometimes the solution is right in front of you. You just have to be able to look at it in a different way. And thankfully, the people that are around me also think that way. So sometimes if I miss it, they'll pick up on it, and it allows me to do what I need to do.
Brilliant. Tell me a bit about how you are passing your mindset on to people today through the work you're doing, speaking or with corporates or campaigning.
So a lot of the time I'm brought in now to talk about resilience. It's the number one topic from I'd say for the last year plus. It's the number one reason I'm brought in, and I think the reason that I'm brought in over maybe some other speakers that might have more corporate experience or business experience is because of my story, because it's just a simple story of growth mindset is a huge thing. Like I wasn't born this way, but I've learned to make what happened to me work for me. And I think people just want to hear that. And I enjoy sharing it as well, because you're always like, every day is a school day, as they say. With my online stuff, going back to just specifically when I decided to have the rotation plasty, those images that I saw were so mentally scarring for me that when I did decide to have this surgery, I vowed that I would be more open than I'd ever been before online. And that's a scary thing to do, because you can be open, and if you're delivering a keynote, you might have 200 or 300 people in the room and you can be very open with them, but it's still only 200 or 300 people. When you're open online and one of your videos maybe goes viral, which a couple of them did get over 1 million views, suddenly you have all the unusual comments, shall we say. That's quite scary. That's on you. You've decided to do that. But the reason that I did was because if a young girl is given this opportunity, especially on this side of the world, to have a rotation plasty, and they Google the word, I want them to find my content. I want them to find that, yes, it was a tough journey, but look what you can do afterwards. I want them to find that positive story, because it could be the difference between them saying yes and no to that surgery. And it's exactly why, like the Jessica Quinn, finding her online, she's the reason I was able to say yes. So I felt the need to almost pay it forward. So I was very, I even had a friend take over my Instagram account whenever I was having surgery. So like we really did open the doors to everything. And even like some of the posts that I put up straight after surgery, when I look back on them now, it's not that I cringe, but I'm surprised at how open I was, but I'll never remove them. Even if I find them a little bit hard to look at, the next person won't. Like it could be the post that helps them. And for that reason, they'll always stay, online, because if they help a few people, then it's worth it.
I think you've helped way more than a few people in all walks of life. So tell me about your goals. What are the things that you're excited about in the future?
Well, the goal for this summer is I'm an ambassador for the VHI Women's Mini Marathon, and this is my second year doing it. I'm going to be completely honest. I haven't trained this year as much as I had by this time last year, but there's still plenty of time. So that's a goal for June. After that, I really want to get back up in the mountains more regularly, like I did before the surgery. So we did Mount Errigal in Donegal about 2.5 weeks ago, and I'm post-surgery now. Am I 2.5 years? And I assumed that I couldn't do Mount Errigal because of my leg, because I really struggled to walk. Well, it's a hard situation walking uphill, but it is harder for me walking downhill, and it can actually be dangerous if the terrain is uneven. So I spent a long time assuming that I couldn't do it, and I was waiting to get my next prosthetic before I tried it. And then one of my climbing friends just said, well, we just give it a go. Like, even if you only get 2 minutes beyond the car park, sure, at least you get to see it. We got to the top and back down again. It was grand. And I'm there kicking myself going, why have I waited this long? Why have I assumed I couldn't do it? So now there's that fire is back in my belly. Now I'm like, right, if I can do that mountain, what else can I do? So Slieve Donard I really want to do again, because it's such a gorgeous climb. And my biggest goal that's been on my list since 2019 is Kilimanjaro. I was meant to do it in 2020. Obviously, A lot of things were cancelled in 2020, and by the time the group I was due to go with were ready to go again when when lockdown ended, I was then prepping for surgery. So I missed that opportunity, but I actually have a picture of Kilimanjaro on my laptop at home. It's my screensaver. And I have, when I was in Tanzania in 2019, I bought like an authentically painted from one of the local people picture of Kili, and it's above my fireplace, and they will remain there until I climb it. So I don't know when I'll be able to do it, but I know I will eventually. And that's the thing about the mountains, they're going nowhere. So even if you have to take a step back, they're still going to be there whenever you're ready to go. And that's helped me not have that feeling that I'm missing out. But yeah, other than that, I just want whatever happens. I'm so open to whatever comes my way. So if going back to the old days of having people challenge me, if your listeners have a weird and wonderful idea, please do let me know.
Where can they find you? Just remind them of your, what's your Instagram?
My Instagram is Nikki, NIKKI_Bradley_speaks. So Nikki Bradley speaks.
Brilliant. And the final thing I want to ask you about, because we were chatting about this the other day as well, is the campaign that you've been involved with recently around parking spaces. Because you put up a poll on your Instagram that I filled in.
Yeah. So I've just helped them now. All the work was done by the Disabled Drivers Association of Ireland. So basically the people that give you the blue badge that people have for their cars, they did a survey a couple of weeks ago to ask both permit users and just regular members of the public what their views are on people misusing parking bays. And they were expecting maybe 400 or 500 max to fill it out. And at the last count, they were nearly at 3,000. And I think that speaks for itself. And the number one thing that people were scared of, that disabled people were scared of, was approaching people that were misusing them for fear of their own actual safety. And that needs to change. That, if you have a blue badge and somebody is parked in a space and they're not, like, it's actually illegal, you can be fined on the spot for it. But if, you should feel safe to go up to somebody and say, sorry, I need this space. But so many people said that they didn't feel safe. So they've launched a text alert scheme, which basically means that for the first time ever, people with disabilities have been given back a bit of control. And people around them, anybody that sees people misusing disabled bays, there will be a number on the bay. So let's say bay 1, bay 2, whatever. And there'll be a little plaque below the traditional disabled sign. And on that plaque will be the number of the bay and the warden's work number, like his mobile number. So you can basically text bay 1 directly to the warden. So that warden then knows exactly where to go to issue a fine. So it'll speed up the process, because quite a lot of the time, if it's only one warden and it's a very long main street, by the time they do a lap, that person could be well gone. So they're getting away with it time and time again. And some people actually look out for the warden. So if they see them going down the road, they know if I pull in now, by the time he comes back, like the chances are by the time he comes back around, I'll be gone. That way of thinking needs to go, because what people don't realise is jumping out of the car, running into the shop for a pint of milk, running in for 5 minutes could be the difference between a disabled person being able to do what they need to do that day or having to just simply go home. Because a disabled person cannot... I'm not a wheelchair user, but I still need to open my door fully to be able to get out of my car. And if I park in a normal space, I simply don't have the room. And a wheelchair user has even more to do. When they open the door, they have to bring their wheelchair out. They then have to put themselves in it. And, it's
hard enough.
It's hard enough without.
Somebody,
So it's been received so positively around Ireland, and long may it continue.
Yeah, and I suppose the thing to mention as well is that not all disabilities are kind of visually apparent. So what's best practice if someone sees someone who they think is misusing a space?
So my advice, and what I say to everybody, is before you pass any judgment on any other person, look for the blue badge. If the blue badge is there, keep walking, because you do not know what any of those people have. Like there's, because the launch was last weekend, the national media have picked up on the story, and they've been interviewing members of the public who have been saying that they've had people verbally abuse them, saying, you don't look disabled enough, why do you have that badge? And they've had very severe disabilities, but because they didn't have like a wheelchair or crutches, they were just, judged basically. So what I would always say is, please look for the badge. And if you don't see it, by all means, go over and have a gentle word. You can get your point across by being polite as well. You don't have to go straight to anger mode. Just a funny story before we finish. Up in Donegal, I went to pull into. I was in a garage, and there was only one disabled spot in the entire garage, and it was always taken up by either white vans or just normal cars, because it was obviously the closest one to the door, and people would just like run in for the pint of milk and all of that. One day I pulled up, and here's a full tractor parked in the disabled spot, and I just thought, no, not today. So I just pulled in, parked behind him, and completely blocked him. And I waited. I didn't know how long. I didn't really know what I was going to do. In that moment, I just drove up behind him and just
This
parked.
would have been great content for your social media.
Well, I don't know. It might have divided the public, but it's an example of how sometimes you don't have to use words at all. So it was actually a young guy had been in the tractor. He came back out of the shop literally like 10 seconds after I'd pulled in behind him. And I saw him look at my car, and he was confused as to why I was there. He didn't even realize what he'd done. So I made eye contact, and I pointed at my blue badge, and to say if looks could kill is an understatement. I just stared him out of it, but I didn't open my mouth. I just pointed at the blue badge, and then I reversed just enough that he could get out. And then I pulled into the space. I would like to think he hasn't done it since, because the look on his face, he was absolutely mortified, because he hadn't even bothered to look for the sign. He just saw the spot, and they're very visible signs. They're both on the ground and on a plaque in front of you. So if you're not seeing them, you're choosing not to see them.
Yeah, I think people know well.
Yeah. And another thing that we're trying to work on is, getting the council to invest some money in redoing the painting of, the ground. Paint them blue. Don't just paint a white sign, because they're the first thing to be worn off. And people are finding that if they are given a ticket, the case has been thrown out of court, because they can just, their solicitor argues, well, the paint was off the ground. My client didn't know that it was a disabled spot. Make them all bright blue, like you'd see in cities. And there's absolutely no disputing it then when they do get a ticket. So, yeah.
Good advice. I just want to say thank you so much, Nikki, for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Having a great chat. I've actually taken loads from this and loads of learnings from all our conversations. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And we will put a link to your social media in the show notes, because I think there's lots of really good content there. You've shared some brilliant parts of your journey.
Thank you.
And what I would say to everyone else is, if you have enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube and follow our Instagram. It's @talentmatters_podcast. Thanks to our sponsors, Sanderson and Finero, and we'll see you in the next one.